In a narrow 52-48 vote, Tulsi Gabbard was confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, shocking both political allies and opponents. Her tenure saw sweeping intelligence reforms, cybersecurity crackdowns, and growing tensions within the administration. Did her leadership strengthen national security or cause instability? How did her policies reshape the intelligence community? And was this appointment a turning point or a mistake? Let's get into details. Tulsi Gabbard had always been a wild card in American politics, but no one saw this coming. In a move that sent shockwaves through Washington, President Donald Trump announced her nomination as the next Director of National Intelligence. For years, Gabbard had been a thorn in the side of both parties, too independent for the Democrats, too unpredictable for the Republicans. Now, she was stepping into one of the most critical positions in the intelligence community, and the world was watching. It was a nomination that defied conventional wisdom. Historically, the role of Director of National Intelligence had been filled by career intelligence officers, high-ranking military officials, or experienced policymakers. Gabbard, despite her years in Congress and military service, had never worked directly within the intelligence community. Yet Trump's decision made one thing clear: he wanted an outsider, someone who would shake up the status quo. Her political journey had been anything but ordinary. Born and raised in Hawaii, she first made headlines in 2012 when she became one of the youngest women ever elected to Congress. From the start, she was different. She served in the Hawaii Army National Guard, deployed to Iraq, and consistently positioned herself as a non-interventionist. Unlike many of her Democratic colleagues, she was openly critical of U.S. military interventions and the role of intelligence agencies in global conflicts. These views made her a controversial figure, especially after her unannounced trip to Syria in 2017, where she met with President Bashar al-Assad. The move was condemned by both Democrats and Republicans, but it cemented her reputation as someone unafraid to defy party lines. By the time she ran for president in 2020, Gabbard had become an anomaly in American politics. She fiercely opposed regime change wars, clashed with the Democratic establishment, and took direct aim at Hillary Clinton, who in turn implied that Gabbard was a Russian asset. The controversy only heightened her public profile, making her one of the most polarizing figures in politics. She ultimately left the Democratic Party in 2022, citing its shift toward what she called an elitist, war-hungry agenda. Her departure from the party was widely seen as an indication that she was moving toward the conservative camp. But even within those circles, her views didn't always align neatly. By the time Trump announced his intention to nominate her, speculation had already been swirling about her future in politics. Some believed she was preparing for another presidential run. Others suspected she might take on a media role, following in the footsteps of former politicians who had become high-profile commentators. Few, if any, anticipated that she would be tapped to lead the U.S. intelligence community. The announcement was met with immediate backlash. Critics pointed to her history of questioning intelligence agencies, arguing that her skepticism of organizations like the CIA and NSA made her unfit for the role. Others raised concerns about her past interactions with foreign leaders, particularly in the Middle East. The media wasted no time dissecting her record, revisiting every controversial statement, every vote in Congress, and every interview where she had criticized the intelligence establishment. But despite the uproar, her supporters saw this as a masterstroke. To them, Gabbard's independence was precisely why she was the right choice, someone who wouldn't blindly follow the establishment's narrative, someone who would challenge the entrenched bureaucracy that had long dictated America's intelligence policies. As the confirmation process loomed, the battle lines were drawn. Democratic senators vowed to block her nomination, citing concerns over her foreign policy views and past statements about the intelligence community. Even some Republicans were hesitant, unsure whether she could be trusted to carry out the administration's directives. But Trump, true to form, remained unwavering. He defended his pick, arguing that the intelligence community needed fresh leadership, someone who wasn't part of the same cycle of insiders who had shaped foreign policy for decades. Gabbard, for her part, approached the controversy with the same measured confidence she had always displayed. In her first public statement after the nomination, She acknowledged the skepticism, but emphasized her commitment to national security. She spoke of her time in the military, her first-hand experience with the costs of war, and her belief that intelligence should be used to protect the American people, not to manipulate foreign conflicts for political gain. It was a message that resonated with many, especially those who had grown disillusioned with both major parties. The confirmation hearings, however, would be the real test. In the days leading up to them, Washington was abuzz with speculation about how she would handle the grilling from lawmakers. There were rumors that classified intelligence briefings had already been scheduled for her, an indication that some officials within the intelligence community were beginning to accept that her nomination might actually succeed. As the hearings began, the tension in the room was palpable. Senators wasted no time pressing her on her past statements. She was questioned about her views on Russia, her meeting with Assad, and her criticism of previous intelligence assessments. Some lawmakers accused her of being too soft on adversarial nations, while others challenged her ability to remain impartial in an administration that had been openly hostile toward the intelligence community. Gabbard, however, was well prepared. She pushed back against accusations of being pro-Russia, stating unequivocally that she supported strong national security, but believed in a foreign policy that prioritized diplomacy over interventionism. She defended her meeting with Assad as an attempt to understand the realities of the conflict in Syria, arguing that dialogue, even with those deemed adversaries, was essential to crafting sound foreign policy. The most heated exchange came when she was asked about her past criticisms of the intelligence community. One senator read aloud a statement she had made in 2020, where she accused intelligence agencies of manipulating information to justify foreign interventions. Instead of walking back her remarks, Gabbard stood firm. She acknowledged that while intelligence agencies played a vital role in national security, they were not beyond scrutiny. She argued that accountability was necessary, especially in a system where intelligence had been used to justify wars that cost countless American lives. Her responses left the room divided. Some senators remained unconvinced, seeing her as a wild card that could not be controlled. Others, particularly those skeptical of intelligence overreach, found her candor refreshing. The public, meanwhile, was equally split. Supporters praised her for standing her ground, while critics doubled down on their warnings about the risks of putting someone with her views in charge of the nation's intelligence apparatus. As the hearings continued, it became clear that her confirmation would not be smooth. Behind closed doors, both parties were engaged in heated discussions. Some Republicans saw her nomination as an opportunity to reshape the intelligence community in line with Trump's vision. Others worried about the political cost of confirming someone who had been, until recently, one of the most divisive figures in politics. Despite the opposition, momentum was building in her favor. High-profile conservatives came out in support, arguing that her military background and independence made her uniquely qualified for the role. Trump himself intensified his defense of her, making it clear that withdrawing her nomination was not an option. By the time the hearings concluded, the political landscape had shifted. What once seemed like an impossible nomination was now within reach. The final vote was scheduled, and all eyes were on the Senate. Would Tulsi Gabbard defy expectations once again, or would the weight of political opposition be too great? The day of the final vote arrived, and the tension in Washington was palpable. Every major news outlet was broadcasting live coverage, speculating on whether Tulsi Gabbard would secure enough votes to become the next Director of National Intelligence. Supporters of her nomination saw this as a turning point, a moment where an outsider would finally challenge the entrenched intelligence bureaucracy. Opponents, however, viewed it as a dangerous experiment, one that could have serious implications for national security. Inside the Senate chamber, the debate continued until the last minute. Some senators raised concerns about her stance on foreign policy, questioning whether her history of opposing interventionist wars made her an unsuitable candidate for overseeing intelligence operations. Others pointed to her military service and congressional experience, arguing that she had the leadership skills necessary to reform the intelligence community. The final vote tally reflected the division, 52 in favor, 48 against. The confirmation was secured, but it was far from a landslide. With the vote settled, Gabbard was sworn in as Director of National Intelligence. Her appointment marked a major shift in the intelligence community's leadership. She was stepping into a role that had traditionally been held by career intelligence officers or political insiders. Now the position belonged to someone who had spent years criticizing aspects of the intelligence apparatus. The expectations were high, and so were the stakes. From the moment she assumed office, Gabbard made it clear that she was not going to maintain the status quo. One of her first priorities was addressing concerns over unauthorized intelligence leaks, an issue that had plagued multiple administrations. In her first official press briefing, she outlined her stance on national security, emphasizing the importance of protecting classified information while ensuring transparency in government operations. Her remarks set the stage for a policy shift that would define the early days of her tenure. It didn't take long for her approach to be put to the test. Within weeks of her confirmation, reports surfaced about classified information being leaked to the press. These leaks, related to ongoing intelligence operations, raised concerns about the integrity of the intelligence community. Gabbard responded swiftly, announcing an internal review to identify the sources of the leaks and implement stricter security measures. She made it clear that while she supported a free press, she would not tolerate breaches of classified information that could jeopardize national security. Her handling of the situation drew mixed reactions. Some applauded her firm stance, arguing that leaks had long been a problem that previous directors had failed to address effectively. Others, however, warned that an aggressive crackdown on leaks could discourage whistleblowers and lead to excessive secrecy. The debate over transparency versus security was nothing new, but with Gabbard at the helm, it took on a renewed intensity. While the media focused on the leak investigations, another issue was brewing behind the scenes. The administration had been considering revoking the security clearances of former intelligence officials who had served under previous administrations. The move was framed as an effort to prevent the misuse of classified information by former officials now working in the private sector or as media analysts. The proposal, however, was met with significant backlash. Critics saw it as a politically motivated decision, particularly given that several of the officials in question had been vocal critics of the administration. Among those affected were high-profile figures like former Secretary of State Antony Blinken and former National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. The decision to revoke their security clearances sparked a broader debate about whether intelligence should remain independent of political influence. Gabbard, for her part, defended the move, arguing that security clearances should not be permanent privileges. She stated that once officials left their government roles, their access to classified information should be reassessed. Her position aligned with the administration's broader efforts to reassert control over the intelligence community, but it also placed her at the center of another heated political controversy. As she navigated these early challenges, it became clear that her leadership style was unlike that of her predecessors. Unlike previous directors of national intelligence who operated behind closed doors, Gabbard was more outspoken. She frequently addressed the public, providing updates on national security policies and intelligence priorities. Her approach was unconventional, but it resonated with those who had long criticized the intelligence community's lack of transparency. Her most significant challenge, however, was yet to come. The growing concerns over border security had become a major topic of discussion within the administration. Reports indicated that individuals with suspected ties to extremist groups had managed to enter the country illegally. The revelations raised questions about the effectiveness of intelligence sharing between agencies tasked with monitoring potential threats. Gabbard took a direct approach, calling for a comprehensive review of intelligence procedures related to border security. She emphasized the need for better coordination between agencies to prevent potential threats from slipping through the cracks. Her push for reform was met with resistance from some within the intelligence community, who argued that existing protocols were sufficient. However, the administration backed her efforts, signaling a shift toward a more aggressive stance on national security. As she pushed for these changes, the media scrutiny surrounding her only intensified. Every decision she made was dissected, every policy move debated. Supporters continued to rally behind her, viewing her leadership as a much-needed course correction for the intelligence community. Detractors, however, remained skeptical, questioning whether her approach would ultimately strengthen or weaken national security. Despite the ongoing debates, one thing was undeniable: Tulsi Gabbard was not backing down. She had stepped into one of the most scrutinized positions in government and was making her presence felt. The political landscape was shifting, and the implications of her leadership were beginning to unfold in real time. As Tulsi Gabbard's tenure as Director of National Intelligence progressed, it became increasingly clear that she was determined to redefine the role. She had already signaled her intent by cracking down on intelligence leaks and pushing for changes in border security protocols, but these moves were only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, her focus shifted to an issue that had long been at the center of national security debates: foreign influence in U.S. policymaking. For years, intelligence reports had warned of efforts by foreign governments to influence American institutions, from corporate sectors to political campaigns. The issue was not new, but under Gabbard's leadership, there was a renewed push to expose and counter these efforts. She directed intelligence agencies to take a more aggressive stance in identifying foreign actors attempting to exert influence within the country. This included enhanced scrutiny of financial transactions linked to foreign entities, as well as efforts to identify potential vulnerabilities within key industries. Her approach drew both praise and criticism. Supporters argued that her commitment to exposing foreign influence was necessary to protect national sovereignty. Critics, however, questioned whether her policies were being selectively applied. Some accused her of focusing too heavily on certain foreign adversaries while downplaying the role of others. The debate mirrored broader divisions in Washington over how foreign policy should be shaped and which threats should take priority. At the same time, Gabbard faced another challenge: navigating her relationship with the intelligence community itself. Despite holding the top intelligence position, she was still viewed with skepticism by some career officials. Many within the intelligence community had spent decades operating within a system that favored continuity over disruption. Gabbard, with her outsider status and history of questioning intelligence assessments, represented a direct challenge to that system. Reports surfaced that internal tensions were rising. Some intelligence officials were reportedly wary of her approach, expressing concerns about the impact of her policies on long-standing relationships with foreign allies. Others worried that her focus on restructuring intelligence operations could create instability within the agencies she oversaw. However, those who supported her argued that these tensions were inevitable, given the scale of reform she was attempting to implement. Amid these internal debates, a new controversy emerged. Questions began circulating about the extent of surveillance being conducted on American citizens. While surveillance programs had existed for years under multiple administrations, the issue gained renewed attention under Gabbard's leadership. Civil liberties advocates raised concerns about government overreach, citing the potential for abuse of intelligence-gathering capabilities. Gabbard responded by calling for a review of surveillance programs, emphasizing the need to balance national security with constitutional rights. She reiterated her stance that intelligence should be used to protect Americans, not to infringe on their freedoms. However, her willingness to question surveillance policies placed her in an unusual position, one where she found herself at odds with both intelligence agencies and some members of the administration. The response from Congress was swift. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle called for hearings to examine the scope of surveillance activities. Some senators pushed for increased oversight of intelligence operations, while others defended existing programs as essential tools in counterterrorism efforts. The hearings became a focal point in the ongoing debate over privacy and security, with Gabbard's leadership style once again at the center of national discourse. As these discussions played out, she continued to push forward with her broader intelligence reforms. She called for greater coordination between intelligence agencies, arguing that bureaucratic inefficiencies were undermining the country's ability to respond to emerging threats. She also proposed policy changes aimed at improving cybersecurity measures, warning that digital warfare was an increasingly urgent concern. Cybersecurity had long been an area of focus for intelligence officials, but Gabbard's emphasis on it marked a shift in priorities. She stressed that cyber threats were no longer just theoretical. They were actively shaping geopolitical conflicts. High-profile cyber attacks targeting government agencies and private companies had demonstrated the vulnerabilities within existing systems. Under her leadership, efforts to strengthen digital defenses took on new urgency. One of her key initiatives involved expanding cooperation with private sector technology firms. She argued that cybersecurity could not be effectively addressed through government action alone. There needed to be a collaborative effort between intelligence agencies and technology companies to identify and counter digital threats. However, this approach was met with resistance from some within the intelligence community, who were wary of increased reliance on private entities for national security matters. As she navigated these challenges, the political climate surrounding her tenure remained highly charged. Some lawmakers viewed her leadership as a necessary corrective to an intelligence community that had become too insular. Others saw her as an unpredictable figure whose policies could create unintended consequences. The divide mirrored broader ideological battles over the role of intelligence in shaping national policy. Despite the controversies, one thing was becoming increasingly clear: Gabbard was not following the traditional path of a director of national intelligence. She was actively reshaping the role, challenging long-standing practices, and refusing to adhere to conventional expectations. Whether her approach would ultimately strengthen or weaken the intelligence community remained a matter of debate, but there was no doubt that she was leaving a lasting impact. As the debates over cybersecurity and surveillance continued, Tulsi Gabbard faced yet another test of her leadership. The intelligence community was now dealing with a growing number of foreign espionage threats, some of which had direct implications for national security. Intelligence reports indicated an increase in foreign intelligence operations targeting key sectors, from defense contractors to technology firms. The extent of these efforts raised concerns about whether existing counterintelligence measures were sufficient. Gabbard wasted no time in addressing the issue. She directed intelligence agencies to reassess their current counterintelligence protocols and identify potential weaknesses that foreign actors could exploit. Her message was clear: national security could not afford to be reactive. Intelligence agencies needed to take a more proactive stance in identifying and neutralizing threats before they could cause harm. Her push for stronger counterintelligence efforts drew both support and skepticism. Some officials welcomed her emphasis on preventing espionage, arguing that previous administrations had not done enough to address the growing risks. Others, however, questioned whether her approach would lead to increased tensions with foreign governments, particularly those with whom the United States maintained delicate diplomatic relationships. At the same time, she continued her efforts to reform the intelligence community from within. One of the biggest challenges she faced was breaking down bureaucratic inefficiencies that had long plagued intelligence operations. Critics of the intelligence community often pointed to the fragmented nature of intelligence sharing between agencies, arguing that a lack of coordination had led to missed opportunities in preventing security threats. Gabbard pushed for reforms aimed at streamlining intelligence sharing processes, ensuring that critical information reached the right people at the right time. Her call for reform, however, was met with resistance. Some within the intelligence community saw her proposals as an overreach, arguing that existing protocols were already effective. Others feared that rapid changes could disrupt long-standing relationships between agencies. Despite the pushback, she remained committed to the idea that intelligence should be more agile and less bogged down by bureaucracy. She frequently pointed to past intelligence failures as evidence that change was necessary. As she worked to implement these changes, another controversy emerged, this time over the role of artificial intelligence in intelligence gathering. Advances in artificial intelligence have introduced new possibilities for intelligence operations, from analyzing vast amounts of data to identifying potential security threats in real time. However, the use of AI also raised ethical and legal questions. Civil liberties groups voiced concerns about the potential for AI-driven surveillance to infringe on privacy rights. Others worried about the accuracy of AI-generated intelligence, arguing that over-reliance on automation could lead to flawed decision-making. Gabbard acknowledged the concerns but maintained that artificial intelligence would play an essential role in the future of intelligence operations. She called for clear guidelines on the use of AI in intelligence gathering, emphasizing the need for oversight and accountability. Her approach sought to strike a balance between leveraging technology for security purposes and ensuring that its use remained within ethical boundaries. As she pushed forward with these initiatives, tensions between her and some members of the administration became more visible. While she had been nominated by Trump and aligned with him on certain national security policies, there were areas where their approaches differed. Reports surfaced that there were disagreements over how intelligence should be handled in relation to foreign policy decisions. Some administration officials favored a more aggressive stance toward certain geopolitical threats, while Gabbard advocated for a more measured approach, consistent with her long-standing views on diplomacy. The differences in approach did not go unnoticed by political observers. Speculation grew over whether Gabbard's independent streak would put her at odds with the administration in the long run. Some even questioned whether she would remain in her role for the entirety of the administration's term. Despite these rumors, she remained focused on her objectives, refusing to engage in political distractions. As the months went on, one of her biggest tests came in the form of a high-profile cyber attack targeting critical infrastructure. The attack, which intelligence officials attributed to a foreign state actor, temporarily disrupted operations at several key facilities. The incident underscored the vulnerabilities that Gabbard had previously warned about and reinforced the urgency of her cybersecurity initiatives. In response, she worked with intelligence agencies and private sector partners to strengthen digital defenses, ensuring that similar attacks could be mitigated more effectively in the future. Her response to the crisis was closely watched. Supporters praised her for taking decisive action and working quickly to prevent further disruptions. Critics, however, used the incident to question whether more should have been done earlier to prevent such an attack. The debate highlighted the broader challenge of intelligence work. No matter how prepared an agency is, threats are constantly evolving. As the dust settled from the cyber attack, Tulsi Gabbard remained focused on strengthening intelligence operations. The attack had exposed weaknesses in the nation's digital defenses, reinforcing the need for more robust cybersecurity measures. She continued working closely with intelligence agencies and private sector experts to develop more effective strategies for detecting and mitigating cyber threats. Her emphasis on proactive defense rather than reactive measures became a defining feature of her tenure. Beyond the intelligence community, the political climate surrounding Gabbard remained complex. While she had been appointed under Trump's administration, she maintained a degree of independence that made her difficult to categorize politically. Some conservatives viewed her as a strategic ally, while others remained skeptical due to her past positions as a Democrat. Meanwhile, many in the Democratic establishment continued to oppose her, seeing her as an outsider who had abandoned their party's platform. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.